Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 154, and today's episode is, well, it's pretty much dedicated to Borrowed Time, or in its full title, Living on Borrowed Time. It is, of course, is none other than the, I guess you can say, maybe infamous second album from, I guess, everyone's favorite cult, and I guess very much now big and most notable new wave or British heavy metal band, Diamond Head. So, and I've covered Lightning to the Nations already on this channel, so that's why it seems very fitting on continuing to spotlight Diamond Head with, of course, with the follow-up album here, Borrowed Time, which was originally released through MCA Records on March 12th of 1982, and we've already been past the month of March. Again, it obviously has seen its 40th anniversary, so I don't need to really go on into depth of any of its accolades, which I will probably get a little bit to it, but it's mostly going to be for what people, or especially fans or whatnot, look, and historians look back on this album as. So that will be as I really get into more and more on Borrowed Time in itself. But again, now I do have to kind of bring up briefly that I was originally going to, of course, spotlight this album in the month of March, and it was going to be very much early in the week, but a lot of unfortunate things happened in my personal life that kind of made me, of course, I had to take a whole week off, and you should know why, because I made an announcement about it anyways on my Facebook, Twitter, and of course YouTube in the community section on my channel here. So I'm not going to go into any more of that just because of a lot of reasons why. But it really made me push back my spotlight for Borrowed Time for an Album of the Week episode to at least a month later. And so here we are, I'm basically, though technically the day that I'm recording this, it is April the 10th, but the day that you're listening to this will be April the 11th, which is a Monday here, which again is pretty much where the day that I release every one of these album of the week episodes. So I'm not going to spend too much time here in this part because I've already did. Either way, here we are, of course, with Borrowed Time. So I guess let's get into at least the history and everything, at least briefly, that kind of leads up to this album. And of course, this is, or was, their very first major label release. However, I do have to kind of briefly go, and again, this is what kind of is a part of the little sort of lead up into this album as far as its recording history and everything, is that when they, again, back in 1980, the year, 2 years prior, by the time they were recording their, some of the first couple of 7 inches and EPs, and of course, Lightning to the Nations, when they were, of course, were picked as the band to support both AC/DC and Iron Maiden, there were a clutch of record companies that fought to sign the band, but the thing is that none were willing to commit to, I guess, to the obligations or try and really go further with signing Diamond Head as early as 1980. If any major label had picked up Diamond Head in 1980, their debut album, which was originally self-titled, but it always got the Lightning to the Nations album title due to fans. Very similar situation with like Merciful Fate's first EP, and of course the Jagdpanzer EP. Is just that a lot of fans kind of titled it their way. What they perceived the EP, because again they were self-titled. Of course, the original first Diamond Head album Lightning to the Nations also had the title of the White Album in some cases too. Again, probably because of it came in just a plain white sleeve. Barely any, I think, any track listing and no title or anything about who the fuck it was. Only thing you knew was if you opened up the packaging and the plastic, the cellophane, whatever it's referred to as, and you take the record out of its sleeve, is where you found out who the band was. But again, it still was, the album was never titled. So let's say if they were, hypothetically, were signed by a major label, whether it been MCA, that might have been one of the first ones to sign them in 1980. Or let's say Epic Records, Warner Brothers, Columbia, and maybe Elektra, such and such and such, or Capitol, EMI, whatever. Then their debut album would have actually been a major label release. And it wouldn't, I think it would have still been, I think it probably wouldn't have made a huge underground splash as it did because of it being released originally under their own label, Happy Face. But it still would have been still seen as a worldwide phenomenon. But again, I think because of the labels not taking a chance with Diamond Head that early in 1980, obviously Lightning to the obviously if they, because of them, it made Lightning to the Nations / White Album / was such and such and such. It made it a underground cult favorite because of whether it been due to guys like Lars Ulrich taking the album to the United States and spreading this album like wildfire to whether, onto like Brian Slagle of Metal Blade Records, and of course the guys in Metallica, and then which then playing the songs, which obviously got the order of the other metal bands at the time, like Exodus or Slayer and everything, and so on. Of course, Dave Mustaine taking him being turned on to Diamond Head because of Lars Ulrich, taking some of that into Megadeth. It spread the album basically like wildfire, from whether it been also to all the metalheads in Britain and everything in Europe. So it just became a cult underground favorite. But eventually, these guys were going to end up getting signed by a major label because of the whole overall reception and that they were getting in, let's say, whether it be maybe Sounds magazine, due to probably guys like Jeff Barton and maybe some other guys, that like of Kerrang magazine and everything. They eventually, that the reception and the hype that they were getting based upon their debut album was going to end up making a major label break down and sign these guys, and that's eventually what happened with MCA Records in as early of 1981. So that ends up leading us into, of course, Borrowed Time here, which it's not stated what month or day that they were booked at least at the Playground Studios in London in 1981, but they got booked there with producer Mike Hedges, who, prior to the release and the recording of Borrowed Time, Mike Hedges was his most notable work. I'm just going to name you 3 bands right here. The most notable 3 bands that he is best known for working with, that being The Cure, Bauhaus, and Thomas Dolby. None of those are hard rock or heavy metal names to begin with. They're mostly either within the range of new wave, post-punk, pop, and of course very electronic music, and some, which might be in the case of Thomas Dolby's case there. But again, that's who they picked to produce the album. Of course, Diamond Head also kind of co-produced the album themselves as well, but for the most part, Mike Hedges was the sole producer, helped at least what was one of the main producers picked to produce Borrowed Time. So finally, and of course they recorded probably a plenty of songs, probably at least maybe close to 9 or 10 songs each, because some of them were also re-recordings. But there has been at least some new songs here that at times were also were demoed or were played as part of the BBC sessions on the Friday Rock Show and everything, you know, again, on and so forth. Again, I'll run through it at some point, the track listing, but because of the songs, how many they recorded, they only, because of the length was going to be long, because the album itself, because of what they picked, pretty much ran at the length of 42 minutes and 10 seconds. They had to pick, and since probably was going to be more over that time length, they picked the 7 best that they thought were good for the album, and the rest was either picked for at least the 4 Cuts EP, which was also released on the same year as Borrowed Time here. So finally, after picking their 7 best, at least the 7 that they thought was great for this album, they I guess that's where it finally gets released, and on March 12th of 1982 through MCA Records, and everyone pretty much got to hear the long-awaited follow-up to Lightning to the Nations. So that, of course, here moves on to the track listing itself. So I'm going to read you at least the 7 songs here. That's of course, beginning with In the Heat of the Night, Heaven from Hell, Call Me, a re-recording. Again, this is one of the first re-recordings to be on the album here that was previously released. Because again, songs like In the Heat of the Night, to Heaven from Hell, Borrowed Time, and Don't You Ever Leave Me were previously recorded as part of the like BBC sessions for the Friday Rock Show. So they were kind of heard, but they weren't nationally released worldwide on any sort of like record or cassette format. So they were left a little bit obscure, but for the most part, Lightning to the Nations, one of the first of the notable re-recordings on the album. And of course, then we get into the title track, Don't You Ever Leave Me, and then finally the second and final of the more notable re-recordings on the album, that being, well, Am I Evil? One of the most infamous and famous songs by these guys, because again, it ended up being covered plenty of times by Metallica and such. And it was considered one of the better, fan favorites off of Lightning to the Nations or the White Album, self-titled, depending on what you want to really name their original first album. So there we go. And of course, as far as the bonus songs that eventually were released as part of the 4 Cuts EP, is of course Trick or Treat, Dead Reckoning, and of course Shoot Out the Lights, which was a re-recording of that song. Of course, Dead Reckoning, along with songs like In the Heat of the Night, Heaven from Hell, and Borrowed Time, and Don't You Ever Leave Me, was all recorded as part of BBC sessions for, well, the Friday Rock Show. So there it is. But Shoot Out the Lights and was, again, one of the most original re-recordings too, because again, it was originally released as like a 7-inch prior to, of course, the 4 Cuts EP. The only thing that's brand new to the 4 Cuts EP was Trick or Treat. And that EP, which also included the song Call Me, because I think these were also the songs that were helped produced by Mike Hedges for the most part. But with all these 4 songs, it made the EP clock out at the length of 14 minutes and 1 second. So it was a relatively short 4-track EP, but it gained some notoriety, mostly because of songs, mostly, again, Dead Reckoning. So there we go, which is a slightly more standard, more straightforward version of the song that I think made better waves as far as its original BBC recording. It was it sounded way more different on its BBC recording. So, with all of that said, what was Borrowed Time? What impression did this album make on its fan base? Now, it didn't make a big impression, even though, since this was the first major release from Diamond Head again on MCA Records, it probably, for those who couldn't really obtain Lightning to the Nations as much as this one, because again, Lightning to the Nations up to this point was re-released under, I think, was it Wolf Records or something like that, and it was what, a French label or something like that, or at least other British labels. They released it with different artwork and so on, and it was still become a very much a collector's item. It was still a rarity, so not a whole lot of people it wasn't very easy to get a hold of. So nobody can have their first impression be with an album like Lightning to the Nations. So really, most of everyone's first impression was with Borrowed Time here, because of the fact that it was released by MCA Records, a major record label, and such. So everyone's first impression or their second impression, depending on which, at some sort of window they were able to have, if they were, listening to their original first album, this was probably a little bit of a slight, they were taken back maybe at times by the album in itself and how much more cleaner it sounded. And they were taken back by the fact that they went and re-recorded songs like, for example, Lightning to the Nations and Am I Evil. They were very much taken back by that. And of course, this brings up a little bit of at least the backstory for why they went and re-recorded these songs for the album, and why they felt like re-recording these songs. Because reading off the Wikipedia page here, apparently the band really looked at Borrowed Time as their first real first album, because of, prior to that, they just looked at Lightning to the Nations as more of a demo than really an actual official first album. So the reason that they went with re-recording, just because of they wanted to properly, in their minds and their eyes, re-record these songs properly. So they just felt that Lightning to the Nations was a straight up demo than a real first album. And it's probably a little similar case with something like, for example, maybe what happened with Fates Warning's first album, Night on Brocken, which was just their original demo that they recorded under their original name, which was maybe Misfit, I think they called themselves. And then they of course had to change it because the punk band with Glenn Danzig and Jerry Only. So they had to change it, but it got released as Fates Warning's Night on Brocken. It was also a glorified official demo. So it was kind of the same case, but the thing is, they released it on their own. But to them, this was just a glorified demo. So that's why they went and chose to re-record these two songs, was because of they really looked at Borrowed Time as their first proper album. However, that didn't register a whole lot with the actual fan base at this period. It didn't really, because it made it, I guess, depending on if they were doing interviews with Kerrang! Magazine or some other sort of really off-the-wall, just local fanzines or magazines at the time, interviews, or maybe interviews on, let's say, on the Friday Rock Show on, let's say, going through the whole process and the ideas around Borrowed Time, not a whole lot of people would have known that the intention behind Borrowed Time were going to be that this is their real first album, and not again Lightning to the Nations, and how they felt about Lightning to the Nations as a whole. So they would have not figured that one out. So to them, they were very much taken back, and they let some voices be heard a bit. Now, that's not to say that Borrowed Time was perceived as a complete train wreck, but it did kind of leave a little bit of a different taste in at least in the fans' mouth a bit about Diamond Head, and what they then began to think about Diamond Head from here on, which then that would lead into the album after this one, which completely would burn and destroy the reputation of Diamond Head for a long time. But still, it wasn't nearly considered as big of a mistake or a mishap than at all, because even if things were starting to take a much more different direction, things weren't nearly as heavy or as more riff-oriented, there still was some plenty of riff-oriented songs on here that still sounded like classic Diamond Head. I mean, they were definitely moving in more of a progressive, very much a progressive direction, and that's mostly heard in songs like In the Heat of the Night and Borrowed Time. I know that's Wikipedia also lists the song Don't You Ever Leave Me, but the thing is that song isn't really that progressive. It's a straight up, very Led Zeppelin-esque blues song. And we're talking about a very epic length Led Zeppelin-esque blues song. Something that you would heard on any, like, you know, the first 2 albums or the first 3. So that's what it is. It's more of a glorified blues song than a progressive song. Oh, geez. It's 7 minutes and 56 seconds. That's progressive. Fuck you. It really isn't, because if Led Zeppelin had recorded their blues songs, then they had their length at that length. They were 7 minutes, 8 minutes. Glorified blues in its own right. But I'm going to leave it there for right now. Anyways, the real progressive elements are heard, as far as the new ones were heard in The Heat of the Night and Borrowed Time. But whereas songs like To Heaven from Hell and, of course, which is one of the only new songs on the album that really just, at least to the eyes, if they haven't heard any of the BBC recordings up to then, this was probably, again, more classic Diamond Head and everything. Sounds like it could have been on any of the earlier stuff. It did. Just the only difference is much more cleaner, more bigger sounding production than really. Of the other new songs would be Call Me, and this one is where I think the direction was heading even more differently. There is, of course, a very much a straight up, at least a hint at more progressive songwriting. However, with a song like Call Me, this was a big attempt at more of a radio-friendly hard rock song. Something that really wouldn't have been too out of place off of, let's say, Foreigner or something like that, you know. Or, I would say Foreigner is the one band that really comes to mind, or maybe Styx or something. Something that just sounds more, just a lot more, and more emphasis on more hookier, more poppier sort of songwriting and lyrics and everything. This right here is your straight up, a very commercial sounding song on the entire album. But besides that, you get, of course, you know, the re-recordings of Lightning to the Nations and Am I Evil, which are definitely good songs in their own right. Whether they're better than the versions on Lightning to the Nations is very debatable. I mean, I do like these versions of these 2 songs, but not as much as the versions that appeared on the very first album. So I'm just going to leave it there. The song Don't You Ever Leave Me, as sometimes has been perceived as being progressive, which I've already called out as being bullshit here. But another one is that this was considered an attempt at a radio song. I don't know, but I think that's also false advertising in a way. That's, I think, is kind of lying a little bit, because since I've already kind of stated that this song is kind of more at an attempt at a more Led Zeppelin sort of based blues song, because of that, let's be honest, some of Led Zeppelin's blues attempts weren't considered radio hits all that much, whether you're like How Many More Times or something, you know, or Baby Don't Leave Me, or whatever the fuck they were called off of their first 2 or first 3 albums. They weren't considered the absolute fan favorites. They weren't really the songs that at least got a lot of radio attention, as like with songs like Whole Lotta Love or Immigrant Song, or even Communication Breakdown or whatnot, you know. They didn't get that same sort of treatment as as some of the, you know, the more aforementioned songs. So really, this is just, and the thing is, the same thing happened with Don't You Ever Leave Me. They probably really thought that this was going to be a radio attempt, but it never was, because again, you're aping a sound that was done by one band who didn't make a lot of splash with some of those songs, like the other song that they had on their previous, you know, on those albums where those songs came from. Again, Led Zeppelin. That really is one thing that comes to mind. Speaking of that, I think what really began to hurt Diamond Head from here is due to the fact that a lot of some of these magazines, I'm going to be Kerrang! Magazine for one, really kind of went and hyped up Diamond Head as being the 80s version of Led Zeppelin. They hyped them up as like the new Led Zeppelin, because of course Led Zeppelin had split up due to the fact of, well, John Bonham passing away. So there was this whole I think idea, or a little bit of just idea of who's going to replace such shoes, who's going to fill those shoes. And that's, of course, that leads into a whole fucking period in the 80s where you got a lot of bands that tried to really sound like Led Zeppelin, but Diamond Head weren't really all that much where Led Zeppelin sounded like, or a copycat. Because of Borrowed Time, and because of some of its more melodic, more progressive at times, and very more different song structuring with some bluesier elements there, it really, and because of course of Sean Harris's voice, this kind of somehow made Kerrang! Perceive this band as like the next Led Zeppelin. And I think because of them, of that, I feel that really hurt Diamond Head a lot, because that's why what ended up leading into the next album after this one, which has been Canterbury. What is Canterbury? I think it's Canterbury is how you pronounce the name of the album. Then I think, of course, the pressure from MCA, I think that really, kind of got into the heads of these guys. And I think that's what really began to really hurt this band. Because it was such like, oh shit, are we now going to have to now fill such big shoes? So I think that was one of the main things that really hurt this band, besides them going in this sort of more of a cleaner direction with the production and so on. Them being perceived as like the next Led Zeppelin, I think, was one of the first signs that this band was going to get killed early on. So Kerrang! I think did a good job in fucking up a career there. So once again, there's a reason why I think Kerrang! Was never the best magazine at all, just because of the hype they put around shit and what they ended up shitting on in the other hand as well. So one hand you shit on, one hand you want to end up placing a bar of gold onto, and let's see which one weights more. I guess in many ways, the shit that they perceived as actually weighted more than the gold that they had on the other hand did. Because the minute you throw, which is in this case Diamond Head being the bar of gold that you threw on your other hand, which would have been, let's say, the right or left, that's going to get so completely weighed down into the point where now you just strain the other arm, and now how is that arm going to heal? That takes a long time to heal a broken arm or a broken hand and everything. It takes a long time to heal that, and that's the scenario that happened with Diamond Head. So it was a long time for Diamond Head to really heal from those wounds that Kerrang! Fucking created. So, and whatever happened from the pressure of MCA Records and so on. So, those are my eyes. I look at everything, and that's how I do. Again, not to say that it makes Borrowed Time a bad record. It really, I think, it created, I think, a bigger problem for Diamond Head and the record label, and of course a magazine like Kerrang! Who probably had to put their foot in their mouth after saying such shit in that time frame. So it was I think, a really bad bad idea. It was probably a big mistake. So there we go. Again, there's good songs on there, but then there's some bad. Then there's some, very okay songs. Again, I think one of the weaker moments of the album has to be "Don't You Ever Leave Me." "Call Me" is another one. I think that really is one of the bigger stinkers on the album. And of course, then you have at least "In the Heat," I think is a good song. I think "In the Heat" and "Borrowed Time" are of at least of the more considered original songs for the album, because they were completely properly recorded, other than being as part of BBC sessions. They're one of the big notable songs I think that were at least good on the album. But again, "Call Me" and "Don't You Ever Leave Me" I think were big mistakes for the album. If you ask me, I feel like if I had my way and I was the one putting this album together, I probably believe would have replaced "Call Me" and "Borrowed Time" with "Dead Reckoning" and "Trick or Treat." That's personally me. For you, you probably would pick "Shoot Out the Lights," but that's about it. But I would have chose those two, at least between "Call Me" and "Trick or Treat," of the more really original written songs for the album. That again, "Trick or Treat's one that went onto the 4-cut EP, whereas "Call Me" stayed. I probably would have took "Trick or Treat" over it just because for some reason I've got a little bit of a soft spot for this song. I mean, that's the most amazing thing that Diamond have written, because I mean, "Dead Reckoning" is easily one of the best songs that they probably had ever recorded. And of course, that version on the 4-cut EP, I think, is at times much more better than the one that was recorded as part of the BBC sessions. So that's where I am at. It's one of the heaviest songs, and would fit perfectly with songs like "Am I Evil" and so on. It would fit perfectly. So I think that was a big mistake in choosing some of the songs for the album. That's where I'm at. So there we go. So after this, of course, it does give them some big notoriety with a lot of the magazines and promoters and everything for, let's say, like the Monsters of Rock. It was based on this album was what got them to be a part of the 1983 Monsters of Rock lineup. So it's probably what got them that lineup there instead of the album that was released 2 months before them being a part of the Monsters of Rock in 1983. So again, that was a Dio and I believe, oh shit, who else I believe that was on there? Don't think it was Whitesnake. I believe it was Whitesnake as well. I'm going to do a little run check up there. Yep, I'm correct. This has been the lineup for, of course, the August 20th of 1983 Monsters of Rock lineup. Which again, it goes from Diamond Head, Dio, Twisted Sister, ZZ Top, Meatloaf, and Whitesnake. And Whitesnake being the headlining band of that whole lineup there. But Diamond Head were on there, and I think they got booked onto this Monsters of Rock lineup based on Borrowed Time than on Canterbury. But I'm going to save my thoughts for Canterbury whenever I actually get a chance to talk about Canterbury. So that's about it. So there we go. So that's it, folks. There's my overall thoughts on Borrowed Time from Diamond Head, their second full-length album. Again, 40 years old for this album, and it's whether or not you think this is a classic or not is, again, all based on you. That's your personal thoughts. And if you have any personal thoughts, whether it be positive or negative, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you have never listened to Borrowed Time by Diamond Head, well, let's just say if you're going to listen to anything from the classic period of Diamond Head, my ranking is going to go, you listen to Lightning to the Nations first, just because of the history behind the album. And then you could probably go on to Borrowed Time. After that, you could skip, but I'm not very much well versed in everything after Canterbury, other than the more recent material since the self-titled album from 2016, which is easily probably some of the best material from Diamond Head since Borrowed Time here. So there we go. And they've been doing a very good job keeping that. And it's been so to the point to where they ended up re-recording Lightning to the Nations again. in a way. So there we go. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Harry Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.